Welcome to the third pod in this series. I am continuing with the second half of traditional versus modern grammars, an overview and theoretical framing, common misconceptions and bogus grammar rules. So, even today there is a lot of residual prestige attached to Latinate rules. Plus, if people don't know formal grammar rules, they often make up their own. When people make up rules or mistakenly apply a rule in a wrong context, it's called hypercorrection, which means that people are trying to sound educated or intelligent and they fail. Let's look at a few examples and see what you think. Is affect a verb or a noun? Is affect a verb or a noun? What is the plural of platypus? What is the correct usage? None are left here or none is left here? When is it correct to say I'm literally starving? And which one of these is the correct usage? Answers later. Let's look at the first question. Is affect a verb or a noun? That's a trick question. Affect can either be a verb, things can affect you badly, or a noun. This poem has high emotional affect. Or an adjective. That person is pompous and affected. And effect can either be a verb, I want to effect complete change, or a noun. That effect is long lasting. In fact, we could even adapt and use both as adverbs. That is effectively and affectedly a political decision. The point here is that English is mutable and highly contextual. It doesn't stay still as far as many rules are concerned. There are a few concepts that we need to deal with first in order to make sense of the newer ways of grammar thinking. These are: 1. English grammar does not behave in the same way as other languages. 2. This is a result of its unique formation and hybridization. 3. So we can't apply rules from other languages to the study of English. 4. This is especially true for English morphology, or the internal structure of words. This means that sense in an English sentence relies on relationships between words rather than on the structure of each word. And 5. The concept of the lexical item particularly applies in English, and words go together in specific ways in English to form standard collocations. Words go together in specific sense relationships in the English sentence. And 6. The traditional view of words as belonging to categories called parts of speech does not reflect the ways in which words and phrases actually operate in a sentence in English. I'll explain more as we go along. People tend to have very firm ideas on what good grammar is or isn't, so I'll refer to the most common of these as the top 10 grammar peeves. Traditional grammar organized words into categories called parts of speech. That's fine, except the concept is very static. It was thought that words were ideally one category, and if that words changed categories, they were somehow breaking a rule of grammar. A better way of viewing words in English is to see that while words might be identical in form, in reality they can have multiple functions in any given sentence. So to summarize, part of speech equals form, word class equals form plus function. Or to put another way, part of speech refers to a static or potential quality, whereas word class describes what the item is actually doing in a sentence. Let's look at some examples. Here is a selection of unrelated words: food, away, take. They are different parts of speech. Food is a noun. Take is a verb, away is a preposition. But you have probably already noticed that they go together in a familiar way. That's called a collocation. They also predict a certain combination of words which go together to create a new word or lexical item. In fact, this word entered the Oxford English Dictionary in 1964 as a neologism, that is, as a new noun, so it's here to stay. Here's another example. The verb to drive takes many forms. Here are some: I drive, she drives, I have driven, we are driving. But then the verb, without changing form, can be a different word class. I went for a drive, which is a noun. She takes many drives. Noun. I have a driven personality. Adjective. We are doing the driving. Noun. Thus, the same form of the word can actually be doing something very different in a sentence. People tend to resist new words, especially if they see these words as ugly or political, or an example of corporate speak or euphemistic, or simply because they think the word breaks some unwritten grammatical rule. And if a word takes on a new meaning, it might displace the original sense of a word, and this also tends to upset some grammar experts. But that's not how language actually works. If a new word is taken up and used by people, it appears in dictionaries and it stays around for years, it's a new English word. There's not much we can do about it. Here are some examples. What do you think of these? Disinterested. Originally it meant impartial, but it's mostly used nowadays to mean bored. Literally, originally it meant by the letter, or exactly what the word means, but now it often means really. So sometimes it is correct to say I am literally starving, but not very often. And would you ever use these words? According to this rule, the singular of data is datum, the plural of curriculum is curricula. The plural of corpus is corpora, and so on. In reality, once a word enters the English language, it is subject to the rules of English morphology, and so most of the time, plurals in English just add an S to the original word to indicate plurality. But educated people insist on the original, so we end up with alternatives for the plural. The general rule is that in formal English we use the source language plural. Here are some examples where either form is grammatically correct. And for some words, such as these, there is only one grammatically correct option. But sometimes words are borrowed intact or invented from Greek or Latin roots, and the source language rules are of no use to us. So if we're going to be strict with source language plurality, what do we do with television, echidna, platypus, or octopus? For some there are different options, and for some there is only one option. That's a rule that applies to Latin. It simply does not apply to English. This is especially true because many verb phrases are actually phrasal verbs, which means that they are standard collocations which cannot be said any other way. If you try to do so, it just sounds weird. And if we try to arrange this sentence, the over-formal structure does not improve its sense. Of course, this rule is based on the idea that in formal English, the conjunction is most typically used in the middle of a sentence. But for effect, and in the more common use of the adverbial, there is nothing wrong with the judicial use of a conjunction. Here are some examples with the conjunction in bold. Mind you, the conversational use of a conjunction to end a sentence, a distinctively Australian habit, does not belong in the formal use of English, or any other version of English probably. Not that it matters to some Australians, but... Well, that depends on what we are saying. In non-standard English, it is an intensifier, reduplication, or stress negator, meaning I have not done anything. In standard English, this is an affirmative stress marker, meaning I have not done nothing, which is the same as saying I have been active in doing things. But sometimes we want to create an understatement or meiosis to stress subtlety or room for doubt. It might be easier and clearer to rephrase, however, depending on what effect you are looking for. The infinitive form of the verb in English is expressed with two words, a preposition and the verb itself. Here are some examples. In Latin, you can't split the infinitive because the morphology is affixed to the word itself, and that's where this rule came from. But in English, putting an adverb in the middle makes a very different sense pattern, and it is justified. The sense difference is subtle, but it can be really important. This regular syntax stresses that the person earnestly wants to go home, but home is the focus of the sentence. This marked syntax stresses that the person wants to actually return home. The implicit message is that the person has never quite made it home before, or they want to permanently return to home. Yes, you can. This rule was arbitrarily invented in the late 1800s, and considering that English often uses the adverbial to begin a complex sentence, it makes no sense. The use of the adverbial can create interest and added sense to a sentence, and there are subtle sense differences depending on how you do it. Have a look at these two variant sentences and see if you can spot the sense difference. This sense indicates that the speaker is hopeful that the student has submitted the essay. This is ambiguous. It could mean the same thing as the first example, but it might also mean that the student submitted the essay in a hopeful manner. Well, that depends on which information you want to foreground. It also depends on which discipline you are writing for. Arts and humanities typically favour the active voice, while linguistics and historical studies prefer the passive voice. The difference is important. What difference do you see in these two examples? In the active example, the victor and loser of the match are made perfectly clear by the active structure, where the subject of the sentence performs the action. In the passive example, the information about Spain is missing, so Brazil becomes the focus of the sentence and the recipient of the action. Thus, the agent of Brazil's loss remains unclear. What is most important is the outcome of the game, not the winner. English long ago lost most of its word-based morphology, including most verb tense and noun case systems, so we need extra words to express any of this extra grammatical information. We don't have grammatical systems such as the preterite, pluperfect, future perfect, etc. Even the gerund has a different function in English. English nouns express inflectional morphological information for the plural and possessive case, that is all. English pronouns can express objective, possessive or subjective case information. English verbs express inflectional morphological information for the present and past tense, that is all. All other information relating to aspect or mood is rendered by modal auxiliary verb constructions, not by altering the primary or lexical verb itself. More on this later. New rules for non-gender specific usage of pronouns. In this example, the singular pronoun every predicts another singular pronoun his or her, but in the interest of gender inclusiveness we use the non-gendered plural pronominal form their. These are other examples. Which one of these is the correct usage? Actually, they are all wrong. It should be, this email is from her and me. The problem is that in a lot of usage, the rule is not understood, object, position, pronouns, and people think I is more formal and should be used. Which one of these is correct? Actually, all are used and there is no sense difference. Different from and different than are typically US usage, while different to is typically UK and thus Australian usage. Which one of these is correct? Both are now acceptable. Originally, of course, none represented a contraction of not one singular pronoun form, and so none should agree with the singular verb form is, but that rule is now obsolete. The same usage now means that you can say either the data is reliable or the data are reliable. The staff is hardworking or the staff are hardworking.